give more returns. Get more security and more interest on your fixed deposits from Sri Lanka's largest finance company, LMDtv Finance.
The key to quality and efficiency. Be a jewel. Professionalism is the jewel in the corporate crown.
Refresh Sri Lanka for a civic-minded society. In association with AICPA and CIMA and 99X. LMD, the voice of business.
Hello and welcome to LMDtv. Tonight on the forum, we're zooming in on the green economy. And with us, we have UNDP country economist, Dr. Vagisha Gunasekara. Very nice to have you on the show, Doctor.
Hi, how are you? And thank you for inviting me.
To start off our discussion today, Sri Lanka has initiated an action plan to ensure a green economy in the country by 2050. We want to understand, what does the term green economy really mean and how does it apply to Sri Lanka?
Sure. I'll answer your first question first, which is what does green economy mean, right? Well, there is no internationally agreed definition of the green economy. And I think there are at least 8 separate definitions. There might be more that have been identified in recent publications. So one example is United Nations Environment Program. It has defined the green economy as one that results in improved human well-being and social equity while significantly reducing environmental risks and ecological scarcities. It is low carbon, resource efficient, and socially inclusive. That's what UNEP says. Basically, a green economy is a resilient economy that provides a better quality of life for everyone within ecological limits of the planet. So there is an element of economy, there is an element of ecology, and then there is society, which are also the three pillars of sustainable development. But this term, green economy, was first coined in a pioneering report in 1989 for the government of England by a group of leading environmental economists. This report was called Blueprint for a Green Economy. And since then, this concept has received significant international attention over the past decades, I would say, 2 decades. And it has become a tool to address the 2018 financial crisis, as well as one of 2 themes for the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, which was back in 2012. And this has resulted in a rapidly expanding literature, including publications on green economy from various influential international organizations, national governments, think tanks, experts, and others. So one of the major challenges faced by when you look at the crux of this green economy, one of them, we face this one question, which is the major challenge faced by the world today is the rise of global warming, which has a direct link with the activities of the people. Since it's estimated that the world population will be increased by another 2 billion by the year 2050, it has become absolutely necessary to control a further rise of world warming due to activities of this increased population. Therefore, it's incumbent on the present generation to employ appropriate measures to utilize limited natural resources of the world for a sustainable production process and consumption for the benefit of future generations. So that's the whole idea in a nutshell. Then I'll answer your second question, which is, what does this mean for Sri Lanka? Well, I think for Sri Lanka, what makes sense is not just a green economy, a blue-green economy. In other words, the green part should include the blue as well. And I'll tell you why. Why blue? Geographically, Sri Lanka is strategically positioned as a neighbor to a very fast-growing India, right, globally, when you look at it. And it commands the most vital east-west global shipping lane route vantage point in the northern Indian Ocean. Our current maritime territory, which includes an exclusive economic zone, is 8 times larger than our landmass. And if you look beyond the continental shelf in the Bay of Bengal, it's spread across an approximate extent of about 2.2 million square kilometers, which is about 35 times bigger than the total land area on our island, right? So, and we also have this very attractive coastline, right? It's a very resourceful coastline as well. It's about 1,600 kilometers in length. And we have natural harbors, rich coastal resources. So with such a vast underdeveloped resource area, it's really necessary to identify comprehensive sustainable development strategies to manage these ocean resources without causing environmental pollution. Now, on the green side of things, Sri Lanka can certainly and has the potential to certainly become a hub of clean industries that offer green energy. We have the potential to have certified export products by taking advantage of our renewable energy resource capacity and by conforming to very strict waste and energy management practices. We can also strengthen the prevention and control of environmental risks and improve environmental public services.
Dr. Gunasekara, what is your assessment of Sri Lanka's readiness in terms of resources, in terms of infrastructure and attitude, among other aspects, in becoming a blue-green economy, like you were saying?
Yeah, good question. I think, first of all, Sri Lanka needs a clear vision. What do we really mean by going for a blue-green economy, right? And we also need, following that clear vision, that clarity, we need a loose framework and some specific tasks to transition into this green, low carbon, and potentially a circular economy, right? And this has many facets, in my view. One is, how do we make our production system greener? What this means is that we have to improve recycling level of industries. We have to think about building a green supply chain. We have to look at how we promote green upgrading of industries. How do we accelerate green agriculture? And how do we, we're a huge service economy. So how do we green the service industry, right? These are some questions we can ask. Then secondly, this is about improving a circulation system. So I'm talking about all these things we need to consider to have this kind of vision for the country, right? Improve the circulation system. We have to strengthen recycling of our renewable resources. We have to think of green logistics. And then you asked about attitudes. How do we change these attitudes in this transition to a green economy? It's about improving the consumption system. So we have to advocate a green and low carbon lifestyle. What that means, we have to translate it into, how it applies to our daily lives. We have to promote the consumption of green products. Then you have other areas like technology is a big pillar in transitioning to a green economy. We have to build market-oriented green technology innovation systems. So a lot of research and development on green, low-carbon technologies is a must-have. And lastly, and very importantly, we need to improve our system of laws, regulations, and policies. Improving green standards, green certification systems, and statistical monitoring of these practices is important. We have to strengthen our existing laws and regulations. When you transition to green, one thing that everyone cares about is price. What price do we pay for a certain service or a good, right? So improving a price mechanism for green charges is really important. And vigorously developing green finance is also very important. So basically, these are some I would say, highlights of where we can go, where there is potential. But of course, these are all works in progress in Sri Lanka. Once we have clarity on where we want to be, or at least a loose framework, we need to delve deeper into each sector and ask some fundamental questions. Now, the sectors could be renewable energy, they could be waste management, they could be agriculture, but the questions are common to all. What is the current financing model that is most suitable for this green transition? How do we want to develop the broader ecosystem in a specific sector? What steps do we take to activate investors? Very important question. And lastly, what kind of policy reforms are required and how do we advocate for them?
Dr. Gunasekara, from what you were saying, it looks like we have a lot of stakeholders who need to work to make this vision a reality. If we can focus a little bit on the role of the public and private sectors to ensure a smooth and successful transition to a green economy by the target year.
Yeah. So to transition to net zero emissions in our economy, Sri Lanka firstly must mobilize substantial resources. It's very expensive. And right now we're in a very tight fiscal space, right? So to do this, the country needs a very effective and an innovative financing strategy that includes both public and private sectors. For the public sector, I'd say legislators, government officials, they can really play a crucial role in helping de-risking investments by affirming clear and strong political will to start with. And they can set up ambitious renewable energy targets and they can implement locally adapted support mechanisms when needed. And in turn, legislators can demand solutions to address their concerns over private sector engagement, including ensuring a fair price for electricity and local and long-term value creation. So this political will, clear targets, long-term policy framework that ensures broad and also just participation in energy transformation are crucial to successfully scale up renewable energy and any kind of green sector to significantly higher levels. Then the second thing you would need is non-discriminatory market access and locally adapted policy mechanisms, which are must-have. This should allow both private and community-based investors to engage effectively in energy transition. So we see private, but we also see community-based. There are models in Nordic countries in particular. There are models of community-based investors, and now this trend is coming to Asia as well. Then thirdly, innovative strategies and technologies, increased system flexibility. Right now, we have a very rigid system if you look at the landscape of regulations and policies. So there has to be flexibility in this system and integration of different end-use sectors, that will enable the acceleration towards renewables and also other green sectors. Then a fourth important role that the government can play, which they can facilitate it, is enable communities to play an active role to take full advantage of the socioeconomic benefits of energy transformation, including green jobs and local value creation. And lastly, and this is something that the government and the private sector should do together, is to have long-term effective carbon pricing and removal of existing subsidies to fossil fuel that are essential to speed up this renewable energy deployment. So these are some of the things that government and private sector can work on together in this space.
Sri Lanka really does appear to be having very ambitious yet inspiring climate targets. In your view, what are the facilitators and inhibitors that you see in our journey towards achieving these?
Yeah, with regard to our net zero drive, as you may already know that the country has prioritized sectors to work on which are the most damaging to the country in terms of greenhouse gases, right? So these are the energy sector, the transport sector, industry sector, waste sector, and agriculture, forestry, and other land use sector. So these are the priority sectors we have chosen. Now, if we apply this to, let's say, I'm going to take your question and apply it to the renewable energy sector. You asked about what are some facilitators. We need policy interventions offering concessional financing for consumers to install solar rooftops or electricity cost rebates in case of transferring back electricity to the grid. Now, this may encourage buyer side momentum in this space. I mean, we had we heard from experts that Cabinet is proposing a bill to pass. They are going to pass a bill which would encourage commercial banks to lend at nominal rates and enable better cash flow for developers to have positive attitudes towards solar utility. So these are some facilitating, enabling steps. Also, the availability of land is a prerequisite for something like, ground-mounted solar projects, if they are to be successful. So there was a recent budget proposal, actually 2023 budget proposal on to resolve these land issues, which restrict growth in the renewable energy sector. So a step towards sustainable energy, right? On the other side, you asked about inhibiting factors. Well, Sri Lanka is currently facing a difficulty in attracting large-scale solar development investments due to the inadequacy of documents, lack of transparency in the system, and really arduous, difficult laws. So government intervention in the form of establishing a policy framework and simplifying laws can actually help address some of these issues. And I know currently there are steps being taken, say, by the Ministry of Power and Energy on restructuring some sectors. But if we are to think about a green transition, this must be mainstreamed across all the sectors that we have prioritized.
It's time to take a short break, and when we return, we'll resume our conversation around the green economy.
Display your brand message on digital screens at prime locations. The largest digital advertising network in Sri Lanka. Emerging media.
You're mobile, and so are we.
Gets me going.
Grab the Lite 87 app at the Apple App Store or Google Play now.
87.8 and 87.6 island-wide. Lite 87.
Welcome back to the show. We're talking to UNDP country economist Dr. Vagisha Gunasekara. If we return to the topic of a green economy for Sri Lanka, how will this impact businesses when we look at both the larger corporates and the SMEs, especially given that the majority of companies in Sri Lanka falls under the latter?
Yeah, good question. When it comes to businesses going green, recognizing the need to go green is one thing, but going green is a totally different matter. The ability of a business to embrace sustainability can vary significantly according to the industry sector, according to the business size, and also their objectives. So consequently, going green can be very costly and time-consuming. And as a result, being sustainable by playing a broader sort of social role, it can be a rather frightening concept. Now, larger corporates have had some success in Sri Lanka in going for this transition, right? So many companies wage an ongoing battle between what they wish to do and what they must do in order to financially survive. That's the fact of the matter, right? But what is still underestimated is the fact that going green also brings many benefits to businesses, right? Maybe not all scales, but to some. It can create new markets. It can cut costs, let's say energy or waste side. If you go green on energy side, transition to solar and you have very progressive waste management practices, it can actually save money for you. The attraction of employee talent, okay, that's another one. And then you can also develop new relations with stakeholders. And, you know, going green, and certainly for some Sri Lankan companies, some examples I can give are Brandix, for example, and also I think MAS. There are others, of course, right? Going green has disrupted their market composition, and it has transformed their business models, right? And their industry practices. This requires profound change in the business mindset and a complete makeover of the business model in order to create and contribute towards a better environment and society, right? Now, for SMEs, the problem is that they often lack information about costs and benefits of relevant green practices. And they have limited capacity to understand environmental requirements. And also they have low level of awareness on what they need to do to address the environmental impacts, right? And the challenges they face are due to various reasons. So SMEs have limited capacity to implement the changes required to improve this environmental performance. And they're also uncertain about the most appropriate technologies and the ways they can incorporate green practices into core business planning. So Sri Lankan businesses, and there has to be some way of raising this awareness among SMEs. A second issue is that the SMEs often operate on shorter timescales. So generally, environment technologies encompass high costs in the short term, with benefits realized in the long term. So improving environmental performance can seem like an additional cost of doing business for SMEs. So they rarely have or can afford dedicated staff to work on environmental performance, for example. Including understanding sometimes complex environmental requirements. I think there are certain things that can be done to make it a little easy for SMEs if we are interested in integrating them into the green economy, which we should be, right? Because they are the majority of the businesses, as you correctly said. The regulatory tools, they have to be simplified, right? To suit the requirements of SMEs through standardized permits or general binding rules. And there can be other regulation initiatives, right? You can offer regulatory incentives for the establishment of an environmental management system and help them move forward in sector-specific ways, of course, with strategies for compliance assurance. So these are areas that remain to be exploited. I mean, nobody's working in these areas, at least very few are. Second thing that we can do to help SMEs is financial tools, grants, low interest loans, and tax incentives for businesses willing to go beyond compliance and invest in greener technologies, right? We can facilitate that. And encouraging them, encouraging supply chain pressure from larger companies and exerting it into green public procurement is another way of going about it. But you're right, it's not always easy for SMEs. There's the enabling environment for SMEs to adopt green technologies or transition even partially into green business practices, right? It is challenging at the moment.
Dr. Gunasekara, you mentioned how green organizations have really gone through profound changes in the business mindset. If we look at the Sri Lankan people, what will a green economy really imply to us? And are we ready as a nation?
I'm going to answer that question by, taking Colombo for an example, right? Our population density, when you compare to the rest of the island, it's high. And we seem to be adding to our ever-increasing car fleet, right? And there's no way for people in the peripheral territories of Colombo to commute other than having your personal vehicles. And there's this debate between right to own vehicle is a personal aspiration, but control on usage can be determined through consistently implemented government policies, right? So what I'm trying to say is that access to safe public transport, access to safe and reliable public transport, right, and last mile connectivity is a distant dream, which I often dream about. Because, I can't help but think of this when you asked, are we ready? I think this is something that would change public attitudes towards green economy. Integrated land and transport planning can be easily introduced into, new development plans, right? But why are we not doing this? Green alternatives to polluting technologies, it can be integrated into the public infrastructure. We can offer subsidies to people, like say electric vehicles, for example. And we can also target some of these interventions to households. So I think for us to be ready, we have to see what green looks like in our daily lives. And public transport is one of those things that I feel is so important to demonstrate this importance. But throughout the green transition, I must add this caveat. It's crucial to ensure that vulnerable groups are not disproportionately affected by our drive to go green, right? Now, one perception that people have, skeptics have, is that these green policies can be regressive and especially, they invoke examples of energy taxation, carbon pricing, right? Now, the support for carbon taxes strongly depend on the revenue use, right? Carbon pricing can receive strong support from citizens if these revenues are used to fund green infrastructure, public transport that is green and safe, and low carbon technologies, right? These revenues earned from these taxes should be redistributed to households with lower income or households strongly affected by carbon tax, right? So it's about showing the results, how you would use the financing method you would use for a green transition, how that would benefit you. That's very important to change public attitudes. The other aspect is, to win public trust and public support towards a green economy, we need to inform citizens about how the green economy works and how does it affect them, right? So communicating to the public on how some of these policies, some of these initiatives make a change in their own lives, I think would really help. So I see piecemeal activities being done on this front, but not a nationwide campaign, right? So we would need that kind of supporting soft infrastructure to win over public support for something like this.
From what we were talking about, it seems clear that moving into a green economy is looking really attractive in terms of helping Sri Lanka emerge from this economic crisis that we're in. And we're hearing that the country is now considering the option of new financial instruments, such as, for example, debt for nature swaps. Dr. Gunasekara, can you explain what debt for nature swaps really mean and how prospective are they in terms of Sri Lanka?
Certainly, but I'll first allow me to give you a little history lesson on this. So debt for nature swaps, when we talk about it, we have to think of, let's go back to 1984. In 1984, Latin America experienced a profound debt crisis. And a former scientist, his name was Thomas Lovejoy, he was at the World Wildlife Fund, WWF. He wrote an article for the New York Times. It was titled Aid Debtor Nations Ecology. So this is regarded as the intellectual birthplace of debt for nature swaps. So as debtor nations cut government spending, programs of protection or protection of natural resources are usually among the first to go, right? So Lovejoy observed this. He feared that the consequences for ecosystems of cuts to Costa Rica's national park, that the budget of Costa Rica's national park, or Brazil's environmental protection agencies, these are some examples he gave, that, I mean, these would be cut. And he worried about it. So he asked the question, why not use the debt crisis, which seemed to be nearing financial gridlock, to help solve environmental problems? This is the fundamental question he asked. He argued that if debtor nations committed to protecting natural resources, then they should be made eligible for discounted debt. A very simple, rational argument, right? And the benefits would be felt long after the debt problem is solved. So swap initiatives would not need new injections of hard currency, and they would in turn boost the debtor country's ability to repay loans, right? He argued saying this. And conservation project would also be paid for in local currencies. So resources would go further than they might in servicing debt. And he said, as well as increasing the likelihood of being repaid, creditors might even get a measure of satisfaction, right? So this is where debt for nature swap, the term and this concept sort of originated. So what is a swap? So a debt for nature swaps, I mean, they are typically, this is a voluntary transaction in which an amount of debt owed by a developing country government is cancelled or reduced by a creditor in exchange for the debtor making financial commitments to conservation. So debt for nature swap aims to reallocate part of a sovereign's budget from debt service to conservation. It's basically it is a financial instrument that allows a debtor country to renegotiate existing debt under new terms. And these new terms and conditions can include low interest rates, longer maturity, partial payment in local currency. So a portion will be paid back to new investors, right? Another portion is transferred into an in-country conservation fund for conservation activities. And a third portion capitalizes and grows an endowment for the in-country conservation trust fund to finance future conservation activities, right? So this is the basic skeleton of what a debt for nature swap is. And these swaps generally fall into two types. We have commercial debt for nature swaps and bilateral debt for nature swaps. What's really important for us to consider when we are going to pursue a debt for nature swap, that it requires alignment with a country's debt restructuring and macroeconomic reform strategy. It's also important to factor in donor interests, coordination within the government and other stakeholders, setting up a governance structure, a very strong governance structure to implement the transaction, and full management of conservation activities. So if we are thinking about a debt for nature swap for Sri Lanka, some of the things we have to consider are alignment with our restructuring strategy with our creditors. It can be bilateral creditors, it can be commercial creditors, either one. We have to see how it aligns or how it complements the IMF program, which is currently underway. We have to consider possible conditionalities to donor support. We need government approvals to go ahead with this kind of an instrument. We need to engage with civil society and local communities. Very important. We need to establish, operationally, we need to establish a special purpose vehicle of sorts, like a conservation trust, We need procurement of investment banks, lawyers. It's really transaction cost heavy. So there's a huge documentation component to it. And also we have to, very importantly, we have to come up with conservation activities. What are the conservation projects, programs that we are going to prioritize? What this boils down to is a whole of government approach that is required to successfully implement a debt for nature swap in Sri Lanka and in other countries where this has taken place. It has been so. And we also have to make a meaningful link between our environmental targets, like our nationally determined contributions, and key financial milestones. So it's really bringing our financing targets and our environmental targets to complement each other.
We've been talking to UNDP country economist, Dr. Vagisha Gunasekara. It's been very nice having you on the show.
No problem. Thank you so much for inviting me.
And to all our viewers, thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, take care.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching and stay safe.